It is a huge privilege to be with you all. I mean that, and get emotional just hearing Brian say what he just said, because I think how much he's meant to me. And I literally wrote here to say to you that I'm better because of him. Yeah, I mean it. I think the world of him, and I respect him so much. And if you're kind of new to this family of churches, man, it's like you won the lottery. There's so many incredible folks in the room, but I would follow him like anywhere. So I just have tremendous respect for him. And I'm honored to be related to you, to be your kinfolk, so to speak. I'm in a different family of churches at Vance, but I'm just so grateful for your good work. And if it's okay, let me just address the folks in the room who speak Spanish, if that's all right. Buenos días, mis amigos que hablan español. Me emociona que estés aquí porque yo tengo muchos amigos en México que no conocen a Jesús. Nada. Y nosotros tenemos trabajo mucho que hacer, ¿verdad? Sí. ¿Verdad o no? Sí. Bueno, ok. Pero escúchame, yo no soy fluido. Habla despacio conmigo, por favor, okay? I just told these guys we're glad they're here. We have a lot of work to do, but I'm not fluent in Spanish, so please take it easy on me when you see me in the break. Okay, when you're in a room like this, I feel like, if you guys have ever read C.S. Lewis, I think it's The Weight of Glory, where he talks about there's no ordinary people, you know? I feel that when I look around the room. I felt that last night when I got into the lobby and I just looked around at so many of you. And some of you, I've just known your stories and been a part of knowing you before you planted churches, and just have seen so much. And I felt that sense of Lewis talks about how there's no ordinary people and we must take one another seriously. And I just want you to know that this is a room to me to be taken seriously. It is a room full of people who, to various degrees, have put their yes on the table to love and lead Jesus' church. And it is an honor to be in the room with you. It's an honor to get a chance to hopefully encourage you. I hope I can spur you on. I read the annual report that was released for your family of churches, and I just got so fired up and so just stoked. And so I hope I can help encourage you in that. Brian had asked me to speak along the lines of, evangelism, that side of discipleship. I've settled that that's kind of what I am. I really wanted to be a teacher. Really, really bad. And I kept telling people yeah, I think I'm a teacher. And guys are like, but you're not. And I'm like, no, but I could be. And they're like, no, you never, ever will be. And then I was at a conference where Andrew Wilson, the teacher of teachers, literally said from the front, just as an aside, he said, I'm a teacher and Donnie's clearly an evangelist. And I'm like, well, cool, I guess that's it now. If Andrew says it, it must be true, so just embrace that. I am different. I do give off a pheromone. I'm not the guy you want to be in the elevator with. I will make it about the gospel somehow, some way. But as I thought about this, I thought about we could talk about where should we evangelize? Everywhere, who, everyone, when, all the time, how. We could get super pragmatic. But I wanted to just actually focus a little bit on the why, because I think that's something of what we're most in danger of losing in this current moment, is the why. There was, as Brian alluded to this in his talk, there was a very disturbing / interesting Barna study that found that, millennials, 73% of them felt confident sharing their faith with others. That is remarkable. That is unparalleled compared to all the previous generations that have been studied. But that 47% of those same people felt it was morally wrong to do so, morally wrong to share the gospel. They say they are more equipped than previous generations to share the gospel with others, but feel it's morally wrong to do so. They say they have got the goods to help, but have been convinced to shut up. And I just read that and thought, what a clever move of the enemy. And I actually have been wondering if something similar hasn't happened to many of us as leaders. We have led through a global pandemic. We have led through seismic cultural shifts, ferocious political idolatry. We are more prepared than ever before to do this thing. But we are getting less and less people to plant churches. Church planners that we do have are opting out to be life coaches. We need to plant churches. We need to swing big for the gospel. But this thing that drove so much of that in previous years has now been viewed negatively. My wife and I planted our church. I tried to find a photo just so you could see, but I actually think it's probably providence I didn't find it, because if you could see what I looked like on day one, those of you who've not planted would just be like, there's no chance I'm doing that. Like I don't want to know that I could physically transform and that negatively over the course of 16 years. My wife looks the exact same. Ministry has been great for her, but for me, I don't know. But back in 2009, when I planted One Harbor Church, we were charging every hill in sight. I was trying to join Acts 29, and I was on a 1-year waiting list. I had to do probably 100 hours of writing essays. Then I had to go and do an assessment that felt like as invasive as a man going to a gynecologist. I mean, it was like, it's terrible. It's terrible. And I went through all of this. You must think, well, how much money were they going to give you? None. And it took a year because there was hundreds of us in queue lined up trying to go through this process. That's what things were like just back in 2009. That's not the case anymore. You can't even buy a church planter. You can give all the money you want. You can't get hardly anybody to say yes, right? Now, in the last few years, we focused a lot of attention. We, the church, have focused a lot of attention on health, more on deep than wide. And we're better for it. Myself, I've benefited a lot from counseling. I've loved like this emphasis on solitude and Sabbath and fasting and prayer. And I'm so glad for the depth we have gone after. But I've wondered if we didn't go from overemphasizing to underemphasizing. I mean, it wouldn't be the first time we do that, right? Luther says that if you want to understand history, just watch a drunk man ride a horse. You know, he falls off one side, gets in the saddle, falls off the other side, right? And so, you know, it's just hard, it's hard to do this. It's hard to hold truths in tension. You know, zeal without knowledge is bad, but what about knowledge without zeal? And so I want to try to spur you on as you think about this mission God's given you, this vision God's given you, these 5 pictures, these 5 words God's given you. I want to try to spur you on to be ambitious for the gospel. And I know that word ambition's got baggage, and so we're going to address that here in just a moment. Let's just quickly look at a few well-worn passages from Romans. Paul starts off the letter like this. He says, Paul, a servant of Christ Jesus, called to be an apostle, set apart for the gospel of God, which he promised beforehand through his prophets in the Holy Scriptures concerning his son, who was descended from David, according to the flesh, and was declared to be the Son of God in power, according to the Spirit of holiness, by his resurrection from the dead, Jesus Christ our Lord, through whom we have received grace and apostleship to bring about the obedience of faith for the sake of his name among all the nations, including you who are called to belong to Jesus Christ. To all those in Rome who are loved by God and called to be saints, grace and peace from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. First, I thank God, my God, through Jesus Christ for all of you, because your faith is proclaimed in all the world. For God is my witness, whom I serve with my spirit in the gospel of his Son, that without ceasing I mention you always in my prayers, asking that somehow by God's will I might now at last succeed in coming to you. For I long to see you, that I might impart some spiritual gift to strengthen you. That is, that we might be mutually encouraged by each other's faith, both yours and mine. I don't want you to be unaware, brothers, that I've often intended to come to you, but thus far have been prevented, in order that I might reap some harvest among you as well as among the rest of the Gentiles. I am under obligation, both to Greeks and to barbarians, both to the wise and to the foolish, so I'm eager to preach the gospel to you who are also in Rome. For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and to the Greek. For in the righteousness of God is revealed from faith for faith, as is written, the righteous shall live by faith. Romans 10:13, Brian read this earlier. For everyone who calls upon the name of the Lord will be saved. How then will they call on him who they've not believed? And how are they to believe in him who they've never heard? And how are they to hear without someone preaching? How are they to preach unless they're sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who preach the good news. We're just kind of just bumping through this letter here. And then towards the end, Paul says these words, Romans 15:20 and 21. Thus I make it my ambition to preach the gospel not where Christ has already been named, lest I should build on someone else's foundation. But as it is written, those who have never heard will be told of him, will see, and those who have never heard will understand. It is so hard. No matter how many times you've heard those words, read those passages, it's so hard. I bet you would agree with me to hear those words and not get fired up again, right? Paul seemed to have no issue using this word ambition when it came to how he wanted to spend his life to see the gospel fill the world. And we could use more and more of that in our day. But first, we need a little clarity around this word ambition. There is a kind of ambition that isn't to be celebrated, it's to be crucified. There's a kind of ambition that isn't to be celebrated, it's to be crucified. Ambition has become a curse word in our day. It is how you end up on a podcast and not a good one. If someone is applying to be a pastor at a church and they use character traits at one of the words being ambitious, that's a red flag. That's where the church, they go, hey, we don't need that anymore. We've seen what that gets us, right? We've seen where that goes. So many of those who have fallen over the last 5 to 10 years were really ambitious leaders. Ambition can be a really bad thing. The Bible is really clear about it. Philippians 2:3, do nothing out of selfish ambition. James 3 tells us that selfish ambition is how you get every vile practice. Matthew 16, Jesus said, if you want to follow me, deny yourself, deny your selfish ambitions, take up your cross and follow me. The Bible's super clear. Selfish ambition is a bad thing, not to be celebrated, to be crucified. And it's hard because the world we live in loves ambition. Eugene Peterson said this years and years ago. He says, our culture encourages and rewards ambition without qualification. We are surrounded by a way of life which betterment is understood as expansion or as acquisition, as fame. Everyone wants to get more. To be on top, no matter what it is the top of, is admired. There's nothing recent about this temptation, he said. It is the oldest sin in the book. The one that got Adam thrown out of the garden and Lucifer tossed out of heaven. What's fairly new about it is the general admiration and approval that it receives. Selfish ambition is wicked, it's terrible, it's bad. And the other thing about selfish ambition is within the church, it can look like a good thing. I was thinking about this, Matthew 23, and his woes to the Pharisees. Jesus said, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You travel across land and sea to make a single convert. But when he becomes one, you make him twice as much a son of hell as you are yourselves. Pharisees were ambitious to travel across land and sea. I mean, listen, travel in our day isn't fun. If you're a guy my size, flying is not fun, okay? It is like a kind of torture, And they try to make it better with these little ginger cookies, but that doesn't really help, But can you imagine traveling back then? I mean, they traveled. Would you travel back then across the danger of you may never come back alive? No one is going to know if you're safe. There's no way to know if there's weather coming. It's totally just terrifying to think about. And they would do it to win one convert. That's kind of amazing. The critique here wasn't don't go cross land and sea to win one convert. The critique of Jesus was your corrupt motives. So certainly a lot of ambition from leaders and churches would fall in this category. Out of envy, out of worldly motivations. We've messed up. We didn't call out toxic ambition like we should, and it bit us. Understandably, there's a desire to never even mention this word again, but I do think there's a case to be made for a kind of good ambition. Not all ambition is bad ambition. This word ambition, it conveys the idea of making one's aim something, to strive for something earnestly, right? To achieve something. And in case you thought that like the letter Paul was writing to the place he was writing, Rome, must have never had any ambition, issues with ambition, you'd be wrong. Rome was not a place where ambition was a neutral thing. The Greco-Roman world, ambition was often associated with obviously the pursuit of honor and recognition within society. It's the same now. However, the New Testament, and we see Paul here, redefines ambition and emphasizing the pursuit of spiritual goals, the desire to live a life that glorifies Jesus. This term takes on positive connotations when it's aligned with godly objectives. A strong desire to accomplish a goal that's noble or virtuous. I think about your vision, your goal to see thousands baptized, to see hundreds of leaders raised up, to see dozens of churches planted by 2030. That is an ambitious goal. This word ambition is rare in the New Testament. It's only used 3 times. It's used the once we've seen in Romans 15. It's used in 1 Thessalonians 4:11, where Paul calls for everyone to make it their aim or their ambition to live quietly and mind their own business. The context there is encouraging to love one another well by being ambitious in their aim to not overly burden one another. But then the other place where Paul uses this word is in 2 Corinthians 5. And he says this, he says, so whether we are at home or away, we make it our aim, that's that word ambition, to please him. And this, of course, is on the heels, it's right before Paul speaks of appearing before the judgment seat of Christ, where we will receive what we are due for what we have done, and then goes on to talk about how we have this ministry of reconciliation. We are ambassadors who appeal and persuade others on behalf of God. So 2/3 out of the time that this word is used in the New Testament is around this idea of gospel advance. And I think this Thessalonians passage is brilliant to help keep the whole thing in tension because this idea of aspiring to live a quiet life, it reminds us that, man, we don't want to be ambitious to be famous. We're willing to be ambitious to labor in obscurity and to be forgotten. Friends, what I'm fighting for is that we don't throw out the baby of gospel ambition for the bathwater of selfish ambition. That we don't spiritualize smallness and spiritualize apathy and spiritualize laziness and spiritualize fear. Multiplication isn't bad. Growth isn't bad. Those things aren't bad in of themselves. Genesis 1, God blessed them and said, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And then in Acts, we see over and over again, God multiplied, God add to their number daily, God increased their numbers. So ambition can be bad, it can be sinful, it can be awful, but is there nothing worth getting ambitious about? I would say that the advance of the gospel is worth getting ambitious about. It is worth getting ambitious about. Thus, I make it my ambition to preach the gospel. I first read these words. I'd moved from North Carolina to Texas. It was 1999. I was 18 years old. My dad had just got out of prison, federal prison, and the guy who was like my dad was my youth pastor, and he had just had a massive heart attack and died in front of me. And my life was upside down. I wasn't sure what I was going to do. And I read these words, and it was like it leapt off and just got seared on the inside of me. The thought of what if my life could be spent for this kind of ambition? What if my life could be spent like that? That was some 10 years before I'd ever heard of Tim Keller or Ed Clowney or anyone else. I didn't even know what the gospel really was. Before I'd come across all these books and the resources that have helped clarify the gospel centrality. I mean, friends, how much more ambitious should we be with the kind of gospel clarity we have? You're going to spend your life for something. There is nothing better to spend it for than the gospel. So I don't want to go backwards. I don't want to repeat past mistakes, but I know we're going to need gospel ambition to get the job done. Gospel ambition does some amazing things. I'm just going to give you a couple of them. Firstly, gospel ambition gives us a kind of prophetic hopefulness. Prophetic hopefulness. We've heard about toxic masculinity. You hear about toxic leadership and toxic ambition. It's like all you hear is toxic. And what happens is we become more aware of what we don't want than what we do want. That's not good vision. In fact, you see this a lot with guys who want to go plant churches. They've got this kind of like teenage, adolescent kind of angst. Like, what's the vision of your church plant? Oh, we're not like those guys. It's like teenagers going like, what's your life gonna be? We're just not gonna be like mom and dad. Cool, give it about 5 years, and then let's have this conversation again. And I bet you've got a budget, and I bet you're eating at home a lot, and I bet you're a lot like mom and dad, That's not a vision. We're not like those guys, right? We need prophetic vision. We need prophetic hopefulness. Where we lose that, where there's no prophetic vision, Proverbs 29 says, we cast off restraint. That prophetic vision is what got God's people to do all those things. It was, who is this God? Who are we in light of him? And what has he called us to do? What is our place in the world? This was a powerful picture for God's people. If God is with us, if that God is with us, that God, they would often wear, in Numbers, we read that they had this little blue piece of thread they would wear on their clothes so they could look down and remember they were tethered to this ancient history of a God who keeps coming through, a God who keeps coming through. It's what got guys like Caleb to say, give me this hill country. It may be Yahweh will be with me. Guys like Jonathan to say, it may be the Lord will work through us. Nothing can hinder the Lord from saving by many or by few. It's this prophetic hopefulness. As you guys, quote, look to the south. As you say, we want to be a people who moves based on what God says, not on what we see. Friends, it's this prophetic hopefulness that gospel ambition gives us. If God is with us, if Jesus promised, if Jesus gave us his Spirit, it aims us, it directs us, it propels us. Secondly, it gives us boldness. 2 Corinthians 3 says, since we have such a hope, we are very bold. Gospel ambition makes us bold. Hope is directly connected to boldness. When you get hopefulness, you get boldness. And we should be bold. Ephesians 6, Paul says, pray for me that the words would be given to me to open my mouth boldly to proclaim the mystery of the gospel. So much of what Brian was just speaking about when he talked about like navigating all these cultural challenges, instead of trying to walk around the landmines, it's to come rather with boldness as an ambassador, to declare it boldly, Paul says, as I ought to speak. When it comes to the gospel, we ought to be bold about it. We certainly need less gospel boldness as we face the darkness of our day. We need courage that comes from confidence in the gospel and gospel ambition, a desperation to see the whole world filled with the gospel. William Carey said years and years ago, attempt great things for God, expect great things from God. And before that, in 1786, William Carey he was a young man, he'd been poring over maps and populations of countries around the world, and he just eat up with this. The world needs to be filled with the gospel. And he went to a group of indifferent Christian leaders and he asked this question. He said, quote, whether the command given to the apostles to teach all the nations, is it not binding on all succeeding ministers to the end of the world? Is what God said to them not binding on all of us to the end of the world? And what he was told was this, according to reports. He was told, young man, sit down, sit down. You are an enthusiast. But if God plans to convert the heathen, he will do it without your help or mine. Undeterred, Carey later wrote back from the mission field to those who were terrified to go because of the dangers, and he said this. He said, look, as to their uncivilized and barbarous way of living, like, yeah, it's dangerous out here, he says, but that can be no objection to any except for those whose love of ease renders them unwilling to expose themselves to inconveniences for the good of others. And then he adds this, that danger is no objection to commercial men. It only requires that we should have as much love to the souls of our fellow creatures and fellow sinners as they have for the profits arising from a few otter skins, and all these difficulties would be easily surmounted. Carey's logic was, people are really ambitious when there's money on the line. All we need to be is as ambitious as them, but for the souls of our fellow sinners. Gospel ambition makes us hopeful, it makes us bold. And there's something else I think that the gospel ambition does. It's something we desperately need. Gospel ambition inspires the next generation to spend their lives on a worthy cause. Brian got to this. I didn't know this when I was preparing this. I didn't realize there was 5 pictures. But I had this in here already. You know, young people today are lacking a worthy cause to give their lives to. This idea of going after the hearts of young men, I so resonate with. I've got 2 sons, a 13-year-old named Jed and a 10-year-old named Wyatt. And we have a dog named Trigger, so how American are we? You know, I didn't grow up with a clear picture of what it meant to be a good man. And I've just seen this as I've tried to pastor over the last 16 years. You know, men are lacking vision for what does it mean to be a good man. And so I've wanted this for my kids. I wanted to help, put them on a journey, on a path. And so I had a little ceremony with Jed when he turned 13 years old and had a group of men get around him. And we did this whole thing. It was really powerful and amazing, but we've kind of set on this course where I want to help. I want to keep calling him to something more. I want to keep calling him to something more. I recently learned that young men, has anyone, raise your hand, be so bold, if you've heard of mewing. Has anyone heard of this? Man, I cannot believe it has made it out here too. I was in Africa last week. They've also heard about it. Guys, this is a dangerous epidemic that we've got on our hands. I mean, just in case you don't know what it is, I'm nervous to even try to imitate this. Apparently, what I learned is that young men are doing this thing where they draw attention to their jaw, and they do this little thing. Some of these guys are doing jaw exercises because they're trying to they want to highlight their jawbone for the ladies. And I heard this. I told my son, this is how I know you're not ready for a relationship. Like this, This is how I know that like, none of these people are ready for a real relationship. Like, man, I could be wrong, but I don't think this is what the ladies are like, oh my gosh, look at that jaw, you know? I've got a list of movies that Jed's got to watch on this journey of being a good man, and the first one I had him watch was Gladiator, and up until this point, he's never seen someone die in any film or anything, so we went straight for it, man. I mean, there's a lot, you know? But it was just amazing watching him, 13, and, you know, his whole world is like, dude perfect, and YouTube, and this and that, and he watches this, and it's like strength and honor, and, you know, what we do in this life echoes in eternity, and I'm a husband to a murdered wife, you know, a father to a murdered son, and I will have my vengeance, and you could just see this thing just rising up in him, and I was like, it's just in all of you, like it's there, this God-given, like, desire, this desire to lay your life down for others, to do something, to spend your life on a worthy cause. But young people today are lacking a worthy cause. I watched a Band of Brothers series again recently, just watched it through, and I thought to myself, if that kind of war broke out right now, we don't have enough men to pull this off. I mean, they're mewing. They're not ready to like storm the beaches of Normandy, you know, like this is not okay. And there's this haunting line at the end of that series where this guy, Captain Winters, he's talking about how they've been left over in these allied, you know, these countries. They don't have enough points to get home, but Hitler's dead and the battle's over. And he said that his greatest challenge as a leader wasn't trying to lead people through D-Day or lead people through Bastogne. That his greatest challenge, he said, was to, quote, watch over soldiers who no longer had an enemy to fight. And I thought, man, that feels like the church. A bunch of bored Christian soldiers spending their energy mewing and fighting each other. Man, we were made to spend our lives on something worthy. And I don't want my boy giving his life to TikTok and OnlyFans and being Insta famous. I want him to like give his life to a worthy cause. Tom and Una, who Brian alluded to a while ago, one of the first talk I ever heard on church planting, I heard Tom do. And I was 21, I think, something like that. And he would say this phrase, you young guys, but he wasn't being condescending like a lot of times you hear that. He would always follow it with, he would say, us old guys, I'm not so sure, but you young guys, God's gonna do something with you. He would always kind of bring that, and I remember hearing him talk, and I sat there and I listened to him and I just said, I'm in, I'll do this. And a few months later, I packed everything I had into a car. I had $33 to my name. I drove from Texas to California, didn't have a place to live, didn't have anything, and just jumped into this church called Southlands and just said, okay, I'm in. I don't even know what I'm in looks like, but I'm in. I put my yes on the table. 5 years later, I moved again, this time with my wife, Jill. For those of you who are considering maybe church planting, you want I don't know, do I have enough? And do I know enough? And is there enough money? Is there enough all that stuff? I'm just gonna break it down for you what we had in 2009. We had $600 is what was given. Church took up an offering, we had $600. Jill's dad, who was very much against this whole idea of us planting a church and moving across the country to North Carolina, I told him, I said, listen, they're gonna take up an offering and it's gonna be so good and it's gonna be really encouraging. And so he knew this offering was coming. He's like, well, so what'd you get? I was like, well, it wasn't a lot. He's like, well, how much? And I was like, God's good. He's like, how much? And I was like, $600. He's like, oh my God, it's not enough. Even he knows that. $600. I had preached 3 times. That was it. I went to plant a church, I'd preached 3 times. And they were probably all just straight up heresy. I read one book on church planting and it was the worst. It must be the worst book on church planting that has ever been written. It was all the stuff that right now I'll be like, nope, don't do any of that. Nope, don't do any of that. We packed our stuff in a car. We've been married for a year and a half with our $600 and we started driving from California and to North Carolina. we hit black ice in West Texas. And a guy pulling a gooseneck trailer full of horses in front of us slammed on brakes and started fishtailing. So we had to brake, and when we did that, we started spinning. And we rolled down in a ditch and landed upside down. I was bleeding from the head, and it was scary. We got out, our car's upside down, it's totaled. Had to call Jill's dad, that was super fun. You know, when your opening words are, your daughter's okay, it's not a good chat. And he said, well, I mean, clearly, this is a sign. I was like, it is. He's like, that you should come back. And I was like, no, like, this is a clear sign we should keep going. And we packed our little belongings in a rental van, and we kept driving. And on the rest of that drive, I found out I was reformed. And that's bad timing too. So we get there on a Friday. I found out I was reformed 2 hours before that. Church starts on Sunday. Man, we didn't know anything. We didn't have anything. I mean, we had nothing. We were going to stay upstairs at this young couple's house. We didn't tell them, but that was like our forever plan. We were going to meet as a church in their living room. Again, we didn't tell them. That was my 9-year plan, this living room. And we had nothing. We knew nothing. We had no jobs. We had no money. We showed up in debt because we showed up with no car. We had like 8 people. They had no idea what they were doing either. They hadn't even been to church in a few years. This wasn't like this great core team, that we launched with. We started on this Sunday. I actually told people, please don't invite anyone because I don't know what I'm doing. I was like, I need like 6 months minimum. Like minimum, for real. I begged them, please don't invite anybody. And the next Sunday, a few of them pulled me aside. There's only like 8 to start off with. A few of them pulled me aside and said, man, I'm so sorry, but we invited somebody. And I was like, what have you done? What have you done? And they said, we just ran into him last night and he just seemed like he really needed to be here. I don't know, I invited him. He probably won't even come. He probably won't even come. I was like, what's he like? He's like, well, he's kind of crazy. And I was like, man, we don't know what we're doing. We can't take that on right now. So this guy does show up. His name was Derek. Shows up. And guys, he talked the whole time, like on the phone, while I was trying to preach. There's a row of people on a couch, and there's him pacing back and forth, talking loudly on a phone. And he had said when he showed up, he'd said, I got 10 minutes. And I thought, multiple times through this message, I kept thinking, I should probably let him know that 10 minutes is come and gone. Don't you have somewhere else to be? But I just didn't. I just let him do his thing. And he stayed the whole time, and he kept coming back, and he kept coming back. And a few weeks later, he came to my house, beat on my door, looked through my window. So I finally came to the door, and he said, preacher. I said, yeah. He said, you know where I had to be? I told you I had 10 minutes. And I said, no, I don't. He said, I was going to go kill myself. He said, but these guys invited me to this church, and he's like, I was on my way to kill myself, and I thought, I'll give him 10 minutes. I mean, that guy is still in our church. He's married now. He is still a hot mess. But he's alive, and he loves Jesus. I think back, guys, on like, what if we had let any of the really good reasons why we shouldn't have gone cause us not to? Like, what would have happened to Derek and all the other people over the last 16 years that we have watched get their lives changed by Jesus? I want to just say, I feel like we need to make gospel ministry compelling again. Because we've gotten really good at telling all the like hard, sad, awful stories that like it doesn't inspire those of you in the room to go, man, you may have no money, you may not know anything. I didn't know my butt from a hole in the ground when it came to gospel ministry. But we just said yes, and Jesus has been faithful. He has been faithful. I remember it hit me the Sunday before we left. I was standing in the back of this church, and I remember it hit me, and I thought, I've got to preach every week. I stood there and I froze, and I was like, oh my God, what am I gonna say? I don't know how to do this. I don't even own a commentary, not one. And I'll tell you, like I felt God say to me, it's like the miracle of the loaves and the fishes. God just said, just keep putting your hand in the bag and I'll keep feeding people. Man, he has done it. He has done it, and he's done it, and he's done it. Friends, just say yes. We need gospel ambition. How do we get it? I'll give you a few thoughts. Firstly, I think we get gospel ambition by doing things like this, seeing what God's doing around the world. I met Oscar this morning, and I have such a heart for Latin America. I was saying, when I was saying that earlier, I was saying I have a lot of friends in Mexico that I've met through spearfishing and through all this stuff through the years, and these guys don't know Jesus at all. They have no grid. The only thing they know is very corrupt Catholicism. They cannot figure out where I fit in this whole, because they know me, and they've watched how me and my family love Jesus, and they cannot see the connection. You know, I'm so desperate to see us fill Mexico and Latin America and South America with churches and with good gospel. So, but I met Oscar, and I just got fired up and stirred up, and I'm ready to go. I'm like, we need this kind of stuff, right? Romans 1:8, your faith is being proclaimed in all the world. Colossians 1, the whole world is bearing fruit and increasing. So we get gospel ambition by seeing what God's doing around the world. Secondly, we get gospel ambition by knowing the ancient plan of God. Romans 15:21, as it is written, those who have never been told of him will see. Those who have never heard will understand. This was God's plan. See it in Matthew 4, that those who dwell in darkness would see a great light. When Paul says he's ambitious about the gospel, about those who don't yet know, he's not being original, he's being ancient. He's aligning himself with the ancient plan of God for the whole world. That this gospel would be preached, proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all ethnos, and then the end would come. We live in that moment. This is still being lived out. It's compelling when you connect that to the ancient, when you connect what you're doing to the ancient plan of God. There was a movement in North America called the Student Volunteer Movement, early 1900s. And a guy named John Raleigh Mott was at the head of that. And they had this battle cry, the ends of the earth in our generation, they were going to evangelize the whole world was their goal. And it was such a compelling vision that they estimate a quarter of the college students in America left college to go on the mission field, 1 out of 4. And many of them, stories record, packed their bags in coffins because where they were going, they were sure to die. Go read it. Some pretty compelling stories. I mean, it's a pretty compelling thing when you watch a ship roll up and there's a bunch of young people carrying their stuff in their own coffin. We get gospel ambition next by being amazed by the gospel. It's just so good. I wonder if you can remember the first time you really got the gospel, you really saw the gospel, you really understood the gospel. I remember for me when it first came alive, and I'd never seen this. I grew up in church. I'd heard all the stories, and I dared to be a Daniel, and I dared to be all these other things, and I did all this stuff. But like when I saw these weren't disconnected devotions, it was a masterful tapestry woven together to tell one story. This big story of how a good God would deliver and save his people. Friends, we mustn't let gospel-centered be a fad from the early 2000s or whatever. Now, I sometimes wonder if for many of us who are so involved in preaching the gospel, if the good news doesn't become old news. And I wonder that because of the lack of gospel ambition I see. It doesn't add up. If you know the goodness of the gospel, it makes you ambitious to share the gospel. Charles Spurgeon said this, and look, you can probably disagree with it, but he's dead, so good luck arguing with him. He said this, he said, once more, he who really has the high estimate of Jesus will think much of him. And as the thoughts are sure to run over at the mouth, he will talk much of him. Do we so? If Jesus is precious to you, you will not be able to keep the good news to yourself. You will be whispering into your child's ear. You'll be telling it to your husband. You'll be earnestly imparting it to your friend. I love this line. Without the charms of eloquence, you will be more than eloquent. Your heart will speak. Your eyes will flash as you talk of his sweet love. He says, every Christian here is either a missionary or an imposter. Recollect that. You either try to spread abroad the kingdom of Christ or else you do not love him at all. It cannot be that there's a high appreciation of Jesus and a totally silent tongue about him. The man who says, I believe in Jesus, but does not think enough of Jesus to ever tell another about him is an imposter. If thou knowest Christ, thou art as one who has found honey, thou wilt call others to taste it. Be wise in your generation, speak of him in fitting ways and at fitting times, and so in every place. Proclaim the fact that Jesus is most precious to your soul. When was the last time you tasted that honey of the gospel? We get so good at giving it out. Friends, taste it for yourself. Don't let so much gospel ministry inoculate you to the gospel. I don't understand. I think the root of the gospel produces the fruit of gospel ambition. I think this is just part of it. So just immerse yourself in the gospel. And then lastly, we get gospel ambition by having holy discontentment. We sing this song sometimes, do you feel the world is broken? And everyone's like, we do. And like, do you wish to see it all made new? We do, And I hear us singing it. But man, sometimes I wonder, like, do we really see how broken the world is? I pray for my kids. So something I do, I'm a chaplain for our town. So I run a lot of bad overdose calls and suicides and hectic stuff. And so I know a lot of what's going on in the town, but I can't tell people about it because all the rules, HIPAA and whatnot. But I always have prayed for my kids on the way to school. I've always told them, guys, there are kids around you whose life is hell. You don't know. They're going to be brave. They're going to smile. They're going to act like things are fine. Their parents may have gotten divorced last night. Like, man, you got to be kind. Like, look for it. Like the Spirit of God lives in you. And your little missionaries go. And so I've always done this thing hypothetically. And then I ran this overdose call. It was a young 20-something-year-old mom, 4 kids, in a really seedy motel room. Her boyfriend was outside fighting a police officer. That didn't work out good. She's laying there. I think we're probably in round 2 of Narcan trying to get her back. And there's like a 11, 12-year-old girl who's the adult in the situation. She's holding a baby that's probably 4 months old. She's got 2 other siblings, so there's 4 of them. So it's my job in this situation to call Child Protective Services, get them on the way. And so I sit with this girl, and I'm just trying to make conversation with her. And I was like, hey, what grade are you in? And she told me. I was like, that's the same grade my son's in. I was like, well, what school do you go to? And she told me. I was like, that is the same school my kid's in. I was like, well, who is your teacher? And I was like, that's my kid's teacher. And it just hit me. I was like, hey, do you know like a little boy with like really blonde curly hair? And she's like, Jed. I was like, yeah, that's my son, And so from then on the rest of the school year, I had to tell Jed every day, hey, just FYI, there's probably some kids in your class whose life is hell. Still him thinking hypothetically, when I know that this little girl's life has been totally ripped apart. Her and her siblings are no doubt getting spread out across the foster care system. She will probably never live in a home with her mom again. That's probably a really good thing. And I watched her put her stuff in a trash bag. And I just think, man, do you know how broken the world is? Do you wish to see it all made new? For the sake of his name among the nations, Paul says, he cannot stomach the nations not knowing. Friends, you and I are here today because someone had a lot of gospel ambition. People literally died for that Bible in your hands. Literally died. I am so indebted to the lessons of humility and faithfulness we have learned over the last few years. My God, I'm better for it. But we must not set up a false dichotomy. The heroes of old were not simply faithful and humble. They were profoundly hopeful. They were very bold, and they had a lot of gospel ambition. Missionaries like the Moravians sold themselves into slavery so that people could hear the gospel to, quote, win for the lamb the reward of his sacrifice. Whatever happened to that kind of ambition? I don't know enough. We don't have enough money. I don't know. I probably need another. Guys, let some holy ambition rise up in you. Let some holy discontentment rise up in you. When I hear that 70% of America thinks they're Christians, but I watch the way we worship political figures, the way we worship sex, I get a holy discontentment. When I hear about another young person in our town die of an overdose or a suicide, when I see a child ripped from their home with a trash bag of their stuff, and women in our community held captive by human trafficking, and young kids. My wife is a nurse at a crisis pregnancy care center. She does pregnancy tests and STD testing on 12-year-old girls. I get a holy discontentment. Am I ambitious? You better believe it. You better believe it. I'm not ashamed of it. I know ambition can be bad, but I'm not ashamed of gospel ambition because the gospel is the power of God for salvation. I know the plan. I've been given the ministry of reconciliation. Jesus told a parable in Luke 14 of an imminent great king who was coming who would certainly defeat anybody else in their path. And I know this great king is coming, the King of Kings. And no amount of good intentions, good works, or good excuses are ever going to come close to sufficing. But this king has made a way for peace. He has shed his own blood that those who would bow their knee to him, surrender to him, would be totally forgiven. And what kind of a toxic leader would I be if I knew all that and I wasn't ambitious? If I didn't want everybody to know? We have an enemy that is very ambitious, forcefully advancing. Friends, you and I need to get some holy discontentment and some gospel ambition. Paul would say things like, he said, I've become all things to all men, that by all means. He was like a man on fire. He wanted to fulfill the ministry God had given him. I want to be able to say that. I want to be able to do that. I think you do too. Brian referenced this, but Jesus said, he said, pray for workers, which we want to do. We do that. But he also said, lift up your eyes and see what the fields look like. There's something necessary about that. Just asking God to help you see your town different, helping you see the world different, helping you see it like he sees it. As the band comes up, look, I know the last few years have been brutal. Ministry has gotten like crazy complex and feels like you need a black belt to preach on Sundays. It is like so complicated. It can get, and a lot of us have had the hope kicked out of us and people are afraid and people are angry and we're just trying to hang in there. And some of you in the room, you tried, you risked it all. You went, you burnt the ships and it didn't work out. And you don't want to go through that again. Maybe some of you are terrified of getting canceled. Maybe others of you are like, man, life is kind of good. I don't want to mess this good thing up. I understand all that. It's easy to play it safe. Frankly, for me, sometimes it's easier to fantasize about a different job. We've all got that. We can have a little support group for that later. Mine is cutting grass. I think that would be a wonderful job for me. Be outside. No one's yelling at me at 3 o'clock in the morning about the grass. But friends, we have a mission from Jesus. We have work to do. He told a parable where he said that we were to engage in business until he returned. And later we'd be told, well done, good and faithful servant. I don't know where this hits you today. Off the back of what Brian said and what I've said, I'd just love to give a chance for you to respond. So maybe if you guys will just play a little bit and we can just take a moment here. I'd love to invite a few of the kind of spiritual, look, I don't know this room very well, so just forgive me if I leave out the person who should be up here or something, but I want to invite, if you guys would come up, maybe just you guys on the front row, if you want to come up. John, Linda, are you guys here? Lamfermans, are you guys here? John's here? Okay. Yeah. Sam, where are you at, bud? Tom and Una, just a few of y'all can just come up. Yeah, just kind of make your way here. I would love just to invite you. Why don't we stand together? Look, there's something about an impartation of faith, And if you're here and you're just like, man, I'm lacking this kind of gospel ambition. I'm feeling fearful. I'm whatever it is that you're feeling right now. I'd love you just to come up and just ask these men and women just to lay their hands on you. Something happened to me when Tom was speaking. Something happened. He ruined my life. Honest to God, this guy ruined my life. But in such a good way. I can't imagine what life would be like if I hadn't heard that and felt that and said yes to that. And I'd love just to create a moment here. If you feel like something's in you brewing and you just want to say, God, help me. Is that all right, Brian? Anything else you want to add to that? Okay, cool. We pray for us. Jesus, thank you for your gospel and how good it is. Lord, we don't want, God, help us, keep us from all the terrible, toxic ways ambition can be wicked and sinful. Keep us from all that. But Lord, put within us a fire that is like shut up within our bones that we cannot hold it inside. God, make us ambitious for the gospel. Pray that this would be a moment where people in this room would look back and go, man, that was the moment where something clicked in me and I put my yes on the table and my life has been different ever since. In Jesus' name. I pray for the kind of quote unquote young people in the room. I'm not that anymore. I can feel it. But for those in the room who are young and they're looking at their life ahead and they're thinking, gosh, man, I pray that in this moment, Lord, there would be a calling. You would call them up, enlist them into this good service. And the result of this would be thousands of baptisms, hundreds of leaders, dozens and dozens and dozens of church plants, God, that you would continue to receive the glory that is due your name. In Jesus' name, amen. Hey, if you need prayer, just come and grab these guys. And here in just a minute, these folks will lead us in our last song.